Well, today's topic tackles one of the most persistent and consequential governance challenges, the blurred line between the board's role and the CEO's responsibilities. In order for a board to be effective, that distinction must be clear. Yet many boards drift into operational matters while giving too little attention to strategy, risk management, and long-term direction. In this podcast, we'll clarify where those boundaries should lie and outline how to keep the board focused on its governance role. If you're joining us for the first time, Zzeem is a consulting and association management firm, and we're delighted to have you with us. For returning participants, you know our approach: practical, actionable insights delivered in about 30 minutes, tools you can apply immediately. These podcasts also offer a window into how we support organizations. And when you need that kind of support, we encourage you to connect with us. Today, you're going to learn how to clearly distinguish between board and CEO roles, along with 8 practical tips to keep your board on point and out of the kitchen. So why does this matter? Well, it really boils down to 2 reasons. If the board is involving itself in operations, sometimes the word used is meddling, it means it makes it way more difficult for the CEO to do their job. And if the board is spending its time on operations, then it isn't spending the time it needs to focus on strategy, risk management, and long-term direction. It means there's nobody at the wheel. What this means as a result is that there's a great deal of risk because the board isn't doing their job because they're focusing on operations, and because the CEO is impeded in their ability to do their job. That has implications for productivity and sustainability as well too. So this really, really matters. So what we're going to talk about is what success looks like. If everything's going smoothly, everybody knows their role and they're focused on their role, what does that look like? I'm going to give you a real life case study. I'm going to talk to you about what directors need to know, and I'm going to give you 8 tips to keep the board out of the kitchen. So first of all, what does success look like? Well, what success looks like, if we've got a successful organization where the board understands the distinction between their role and the CEO's role, and they both honor and respect their roles, we've got well-trained, engaged, and effective board members. And we've got a good crop of people who are looking at that board, seeing that it's setting a very good example, and they want to get onto the board. So we've got the right people in the pipeline as well, too. Further, the board is focused on the future and the high level. The board is doing their job. They're keeping an eye out for the future, and they're guiding the organization. And finally, we've got good policies and good processes, and even more importantly, everybody knows what they are and they adhere to them. So this podcast is part of the High Performance Membership Organization series, otherwise known as the HPO Podcast. If you'd like to find out more about what an HPO is all about, just scan the QR code on the screen. And if this link was forwarded to you, get your own personal subscription and don't miss an episode. Just go to this link. If you do want a copy of the slides, we're happy to share the slides with you. Just ask for a copy. Now, let's go straight into the case study. I'm giving you this example. It's a real-life example from a few years ago, and you'll see how interesting it is from an operations versus governance perspective. Now, this is a national association, very well respected association, well-respected staff and CEO, and they are fully staffed. They've got a decent budget. They've got all the positions filled that are needed. And what they've decided to do at this point is they've decided to undertake, for the first time ever, a national marketing campaign. And this national marketing campaign is going to be, fairly expensive because it's across Canada. It's going to have a fair bit of visibility. And the idea is visibility. What the organization wants to do is they want to profile their professional members and what they do to the public, because their profession isn't anywhere near as well known as some other professions in the healthcare area, like physicians and nurses, for example. So there's a lot of excitement around this, professional pride. And where we are at this point in the very early stages is the board has approved the high-level deliverables and the budget. So they've agreed, yes, we should do this. This is the deliverables we're looking for. These are the outcomes we're expecting to get for this major investment in time and money. And they've approved the budget. So that's all been done. Now, where we are in the next step here is the CEO is reporting on the progress on the plan to the board. So they're explaining to the board what's been decided, what's in process, all that kind of stuff. And the board is super excited. And they immediately jump head first, feet first, arms first into every single detail of the campaign. Well, I'm not sure about that color palette. And, should we start in Halifax or should we start in Victoria? Just hands on. And they're only human, of course. This is an exciting project. Everyone wants to be part of it. So you can't blame them for getting excited and getting involved. But is there a problem here? It's a big campaign. The board is the board. Do we have a problem with the fact that they're jumping in and wanting to do the operational details? Well, yes, we do. And it's a problem of oversight and it's a problem of accountability. So really two problems here. What the board should have done, because this is their job, was to look at the plan at a high level and say, okay, here's the plan, never mind the color palette, the cities, any of that stuff. What are the deliverables we approved? What are the deliverables that this campaign must achieve? And is this plan in line with achieving those deliverables? And is this plan in line with the budget that we approved? Those are the questions they need to be asking. And if they're not thinking about that, then who is thinking about it? The other problem is the CEO, the marketing director, and the rest of the team, they don't know when they're going to be second guessed. They're making decisions based on their expertise and their knowledge, which is, after all, why they're collecting a salary at the organization. And yet they're getting second guessed by people who are in a completely different area of business. So yes, there's a problem, and that is the problem. So what should the CEO do? The CEO's got a couple of choices here. The CEO can say, you know what, I'm so glad they're enthused. I don't want to dampen that enthusiasm. I'll try to work around their meddling. That's option one. Option two is the CEO can push back and say, thanks very much for your enthusiasm and your passion. It's much appreciated. Now you need to let me and George and the rest of the team work out these operational details, because that's our job. That's in our court. And then to focus on what the board actually needs to do. Or the board can say, or the CEO can just be completely silent. So there's some choices here. In this case, the CEO decided to push back. And they are fortunate that the CEO is a very well-respected individual, really understands the difference between operations and governance. The CEO has that credibility, and the board chose to listen to the CEO. So that was fortunate all around. Certainly, I've seen situations where the CEO has been unwilling to push back for one reason or another. Sometimes it's a lack of confidence, sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. And I've seen situations where the CEO has done exactly what they needed to. They pushed back very gently and appropriately, and the board has just completely railroaded them and ignored them. So in this case, there was a very happy ending. The CEO continued to provide the regular updates. The board focused on what they needed to focus on. The campaign was successful, and the deliverables were achieved and on budget. So this one had a happy ending, but remember, the CEO had a key role here in stopping the meddling before it started to become a problem. One of the challenges we've got in operations versus governance is virtually every board will say, oh yeah, we've delegated that to the CEO. They will almost never give you a wrong answer. They know that's what they're supposed to do. But when you delegate to the CEO and then you're constantly taking back part of the decision making or all of the decision making, you don't have a partnership anymore. And it's not delegation, and it makes it exceptionally difficult for the CEO to do their job. And with that extra friction that the CEO is experiencing by not really knowing where their job begins and ends, it means it is a much less efficient organization. So in terms of who does what, the members, they decided, you're a membership organization, the members decide who is on the board. That's their decision. These are the people that are going to represent us and meet our interests. The board decides what are the right things for us to do. We're looking forward, we're looking into the future. What do we need to do? The CEO decides how things will be done. Now, in terms of what directors are responsible for, we've got the legal duties, which are well documented, the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. Care means you're making informed decisions. You're making thoughtful and careful decisions as a board member. It means there is no conflict between your work on this board, your professional life, or your personal life. or any other boards that you sit in. That's loyalty. And then obedience, of course, is compliance, whether it's compliance with laws or bylaws or policies, as the case may be. These are your legal duties. Then there are a lot of other duties that the board needs to focus on in order to keep out of hot water and to make sure that their job is getting done. They've been voted in by the membership. They are there to support their interests. They need to make sure that there's a plan in place, a strategic plan that we are following and we're monitoring our progress on it. They need to make sure that there's an annual budget and business plan and that the board has reviewed it and approved it. They are responsible for managing their one employee. The one employee of the board is the CEO. So that is hiring the CEO, setting the deliverables and compensation, monitoring and evaluating them, supporting them, and if it were ever to become necessary, firing them as well too. They're responsible for policy. So the board needs to take responsibility for policy, not just ensuring that it's created, but making sure that it's followed. And finally, maybe most importantly, and so often this one doesn't get done, is the board needs to monitor and evaluate itself. If the board doesn't do this, nobody will. And it's a rare thing when you see this happen, and often it isn't something the board thinks of. So it's important for board members to understand as part of their training that part of their job is to monitor and evaluate the board as a whole. Now, with the officers, like the president or the chair, the vice president, the treasurer, these are the officers. They don't have any more authority than any of the other directors. They have exactly the same amount of authority as every director on the board. Now, what's the CEO responsible for? Well, obviously the operations deliverables, which includes the staff, the office, and I do want to note operating committees, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Of course, in order for the board to review and approve the business plan and budget, the CEO needs to draft it. And then the CEO also needs to make sure they're adhering to policies. They're giving the board the information and the feedback. The board needs to make informed decisions. So the CEO is supposed to be reporting on operations overall at a high level, and also making sure that the board has all the data, all the information to make the decisions that they need to make. Finally, it is the CEO's job to manage the operating committees. Now, keep in mind, most boards, if they have committees, have a combination of board committees, or we could call them governance committees, and operating committees. Now, often what happens is every committee, regardless of whether it's governance or operating, it reports to the board. Now, this is a problem because when you've got operating committees that are actually there to help the staff do stuff that they simply don't have the time or the resources to do, the operating committees should be reporting to the CEO. The CEO is the CEO, the executive director, the chief staff officer, whatever word you want to use for that role. You want the operating committees reporting to the CEO because the CEO has accountability for the operations deliverables. So if they're reporting directly to the board, then they're effectively bypassing the chief staff officer or the CEO. The governance committee should be reporting directly to the board. And the chair, of course, the chair or the president of the board is there to facilitate the board and the member meetings. So we've got these different roles and we've got different committees doing a different kind of reporting structure. So let's talk about some examples there. What about the Finance and Audit Committee? Should they be reporting to the board or the CEO? This is clearly a governance and oversight role. They should definitely be reporting to the board. If you've got a governance committee, who should that report to? Well, clearly it's governance. It should be reporting to the board. What about the Scholarships and Awards Committee? Keep in mind, why do we have a Scholarships and Awards Committee? It could be because we just don't have enough staff to manage these programs. Or it could be that we just want information about what's going on the ground. Who are the kind of speakers we should have? Are there some that we should definitely recognize in the scholarship and awards because they're closer to what's going on? But this is definitely an operations committee. It's an operations activity, and the CEO has accountability for scholarships and awards. Same thing with member programs. You probably want to have a committee where you've got board members and other volunteers who can talk about what they think members would want, because after all, they are members themselves. But member programs are operational, and the CEO is accountable for those. So therefore, member programs committees should be reporting to the CEO. Nominations committee. This is the committee that helps the board decide who should be recommended on the slate of directors. And the nominations committee is clearly performing a governance role. They should report to the board. Professional Discipline Committee. This is an interesting one. Some organizations have dual responsibilities. They are responsible for making sure that they are representing the interests of the members. And they are also making sure that they are doing professional discipline for their profession and for their professional members. And often what you find is the Professional Discipline Committee, because of the politics and the visibility that's involved with this, often the Professional Discipline Committee is reporting directly to the board. And yet this is very much an operational role. So think about your committees. What committees do you have right now? Which of them should be reporting to the board? Which of them should be reporting to the CEO? And by the way, keep in mind, just because a committee reports to the CEO doesn't mean their work doesn't get recognized by the board. It's just the CEO's responsibility to make sure that they're reporting on what the operations committees are doing. So those committees will still be recognized by the board. The board will still know what they're doing, but it goes through the CEO. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 8 tips for keeping your board on point and out of the kitchen. First of all, make sure your CEO is trained and they understand what is appropriate to bring to the board for discussion or decision and what is FYI only. Make sure your directors are trained and make sure that they're engaged. Make sure your directors have plenty of governance work so they don't have time to meddle. Often what happens is we get troubled because the directors are meddling in operations, and yet there's nothing on their to-do list that is governance oriented. We've got agendas that are very operations focused. It's just natural. You're a human being. You're going to focus on the things that are perceived to be important. So make sure that there's plenty of governance work, that the board of directors has lots to do on the governance side. If you are a working board, if you have a working board, which let's interpret this to be either you don't have any staff because you don't have the resources for that, or maybe you've only got 1 or 2 people, you really do need committees, volunteers who are actually doing operations work. Those operations committee need to be aware that they are reporting to the CEO. So they need to take their director hat off when they're doing their operational committee work. Also make sure, be very careful with your agendas. It's very easy for agendas to become very operational oriented. And if they do, then it's no wonder the board's meddling in operations. Keep the agendas high level and make sure that you've got expectations for each item. If it's a report on operations, then the expectation is information only. We're not here to discuss, debate, decide, or vote. Other thing that I encourage you to consider is having weekly calls with the chair and the CEO. If you have calls weekly, they don't have to be long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It just stops issues from developing because they can be discussed quickly before they become issues. It gives an opportunity for the CEO and the chair to build a bond. It helps to get new chairs up to speed quickly as well, too, because they're talking to the CEO every week. So I find that really helpful, and it's not time consuming. The other consideration is look for internal leadership on governance. Find directors who really get governance, they understand it, they want to make the board more effective, and make sure that they are monitoring the agenda, they're monitoring board discussion. And when a discussion starts slipping into operations, these watchdogs will put their hands up and say, okay, guys, this is operations, let's elevate the conversation and take it back up to high level. So having that watchdog can be really helpful. Also, director selection. Keep in mind, just because you figure that Joe would be a good addition to the board or Mary would be a good addition to the board doesn't necessarily mean that they will be. They may have the capability of being great on the board, but it doesn't mean they will be. You've got to do your vetting before you invite directors to join the board. So make sure that you've got a formal selection process. Make sure that it's totally open to everybody. You might queue different people to apply, but it's open to everyone. Everyone gets treated the same way. It's transparent. They have to provide information about themselves and why they want to be on the board. And I encourage you to have an interview process for your directors before the nominations committee makes a recommendation. Ask them a question so that you can get a sense of what they want to focus on. If you're interviewing somebody that looks really promising, but they've clearly got a personal hobby horse, and that's all they want to ride, they may not be the best choice for the board of directors. And finally, think about third-party assistance. You don't want the CEO to be having to keep the board on track for governance. The board needs to do that themselves, but sometimes if you don't have a neutral third party, it can get difficult because you've got people that have got skin in the game. So if you can afford it and you've got the opportunity or you've got volunteers from outside, please do think about third party assistance. Now, I'm going to give you 4 tips for engaging new directors because this is something that is really critical. You think about when a new director comes on board, you're on the board or you're the CEO, you know everybody around the table, you know them well, you know about their families, you know what kind of people they are. Well, if I'm a new director and I'm coming into the room or the screen for the first time, I'm the new kid on the block. I don't know, I probably don't even know who these people are. I don't know what to expect from them. And that's going to mean there's a certain muted level of contribution from me. I don't know what's been discussed in the past. I'm not up to speed. You've agreed to put me on the board. The members have voted me on the board. But if I'm not engaged right away, my hands are really tied in terms of what I can contribute. And it's going to take me several, maybe a number of board meetings before I really feel that I'm engaged and I'm up to speed. So we want to get that over with really quickly. So what we want to do in terms of engaging our new directors, number 1, train them immediately, even before they get to their first board meeting. And if the timing is too tight for that, then at least before they get to their second board meeting, they should be trained within the first month of getting onto the board. Make sure that they know what their role is, and not just their role from a big picture as a director versus the CEO, but they also know the duties and the risks that are inherent in this organization itself. Find ways to connect them with the other directors so they feel comfortable with the other people on the board. They understand them. They know what they're like. They know what to expect. That's going to help them to keep their stress level down and be able to contribute more. And also make sure that at least during the first 6 months, both the CEO and the chair reach out on a regular basis to the new directors. And by the way, please don't think they know this. Remind them of why the board considered them to be a really good bet. Remind them, you do a really good job of this, and we knew that's something we needed on the board. Or you've got really good experience in this area, and that is something we need because this is what we're going through right now. Or you've got really good influence in this particular area. This is what we need. Keep in mind, if you don't tell me why you want to be on the board, how am I to know that? And as human beings, we often underrate our abilities because it just comes naturally to us. So we think everybody has those same abilities. It wouldn't occur to us that was why we were invited on the board. So make sure you tell your new directors, this is why you're here. This is what we're hoping for from you. And this is what we know you can deliver. Make sure you're doing that and make sure that happens very early in the conversation. So in terms of what we talked about what success looks like. We talked about what the directors need to know. I gave you 8 tips for keeping your directors and your board out of the kitchen and 4 tips for engaging new directors. If you want some help taking your board forward in this area, we offer governance training and strategic planning. Just reach out and ask, and we'd be happy to chat with you about your needs. So now what I'd like to do is I would like to open it up to live Q&A. Kevin, what do we have for questions?
So we have a number of questions today. First of which is, which policies should a board review and approve versus just accept? And what should the process of reviewing and approving a policy look like?
Well, it depends on the policy. Generally speaking, you're going to have operational policies and you're going to have board policies. Operational policies are things like, anything related to HR, that kind of thing. That would be the sort of thing that you would want to be the board to review, because the HR policy not only applies to staff, which the board aren't going to be involved with, but it applies to the CEO as well too. So you want them to be reviewing that. You want them to be reviewing conflict of interest, code of conduct, that kind of thing. But things like, how often should staff be in the office as opposed to working from home? What's the dress code? All of that kind of stuff. That should not be going to the board. The board aren't experts in HR. The CEO should be an expert in HR. So again, it depends on what kind of a policy it actually is.
Okay. And then a follow-up question to that would be, Should issues that affect both staff and the board be addressed in a single policy or two separate policies? And is it ever appropriate to have two different policies, same issue, but one for staff and one for the board?
Yes, it is. It's not always appropriate, but it's often appropriate to have two different policies for staff and the board. I mean, the code of conduct that you're expecting from directors and the code of conduct you're expecting from your staff, there's going to be overlap there for sure too. But keeping in mind that your staff are getting paid to perform a certain job with a clear job description in it and a very specific job description, you don't necessarily want to try to combine them all in one big policy. Anything that takes too long to read is less likely that it's going to be followed. The more specific it is, the better and the more effective it'll probably be. Sorry, Kevin, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muted, of course. Uh, do you recommend a specific handout that addresses the line between operations and the board that you could recommend sharing?
Yes, we will, as we always do, this slide deck will be made available to anyone who would like it. We're happy to share the slide deck. And also anyone who has attended the event will also get a link to a recording of this particular video. What I also do is I often give presentations, maybe 60 or 90 minutes to boards, just a quick shot on this particular topic, just from a in-person training kind of perspective.
So this next question, so the submitter says, our organization is at a crossroads. Luckily, our board is very much engaged. They have a lot of good ideas, but a lot of these ideas venture a bit too far into operations. So the question is, how can this organization sort of reassert the boundary between governance and operations without making the board feel as though their opinion does not matter?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And once it's started, it's really hard to bring the board back. And let's keep in mind, to some extent, this is human nature. The people that are on any board, most of them probably have very operational oriented jobs. And it is their daily work to do operations. It's not their daily work to be focusing on strategy. So a lot of people will come onto the board with never having focused on strategy. And maybe it isn't something that comes naturally to them. Maybe it isn't something that they even think about. Maybe it's not something that they even know is part of their job as a director. First of all, training is critical. Your board of directors needs to know as soon as they get on the board, this is what our role is. This is not what our role is. So training is absolutely critical. Second thing that's really critical is making sure that the board has enough governance work. Remember, we talked about that earlier. Make sure that your board has all the governance work that they should have and that they can manage so that they are seeing this is governance work. This is the stuff that we need to be focused on. Also, make sure that from the perspective of managing through this, once the board is trained and they know what they're supposed to be doing, they're still likely to be inclined to fall back into the operations discussion. And what can really help here is having someone who's been appointed as the governance watchdog on the board. This means that the CEO isn't the one that's always having to bring them back. That just kind of sounds like Charlie Brown's school teacher. They just hear mwah, 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 and they stop paying attention to it. But if you've got somebody on the board whose job is to keep an eye on the conversations that are happening and then put up their hand and say, you know what, I think we're heading down into operations. Let's elevate the conversation here. Having that governance watchdog would really help. If the board is already in the habit of getting too far down into operations, that watchdog is a very important role.
Thank you. So once the barrels started rolling and the board is already kind of knee deep in operations, what are some other ways that you can sort of pull them back into a more purely governance related role?
Well, really what you need to do is you need to bring in somebody who's not on the board and who isn't the CEO. So no staff, you need somebody from outside that doesn't have skin in the game. And it doesn't mean that you have to hire a consultant. You might be able to get a volunteer who can come in, but it's got to be somebody who's got no axe to grind. And you need them to be able to sit down with the board and explain, as I just did here, what is the problem when the board gets involved in operations? What challenges does it result in? Help them to understand what the problem is first. Help them to have some examples. For example, 3 months ago, this was delegated to the CEO, but then the board got very involved. And here's what happened. Here's the challenges that there were for the CEO. So you've got to talk it through. Remember, it's a partnership between the board and the CEO. It isn't just a reporting relationship. And when one partner is having a problem with the way the other one is behaving, you've got to discuss it. So bring it out in the open. Don't let it go on. It will, believe me, it does not get better if you ignore it. It gets worse.
Okay, and it looks like there's one more question. You know, this the submitter is running a board that has recently restructured membership, and the board has taken on the model of a working board. They're now getting ready to set up committees. They do have a CEO, but due to limited resources, this individual only works in that capacity in a part-time role. Is there a way to hire an executive director that is basically working on a purely volunteer basis? And if so, how would they go about finding such an individual?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, the upshot of the question is, can we get a volunteer executive director? Is that possible? Is there a model out there for that?
Yes.
I've not heard of that, no. It may exist, but I've not heard of it. It's tough when you've got somebody doing operations where they're not getting paid for it, because then where's the job description, and there's no trade of compensation, for the role responsibilities. What is a more common model is that the role of think of what the executive director and staff would be doing as a whole. What are the pillars of the things that they would be doing? And then have committees that are responsible for each of those pillars. So rather than having one person doing the executive director thing full time, you've got a group of members who are actually helping out doing a piece of the work that the executive director and the staff would be doing if they could afford them.
Okay, good recommendation. And that looks like our last question for the day.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Please keep in mind, we've got another podcast coming up next, the 19th of May. We're going to be talking about what is your member value proposition, defining it, using it, and selling it. Kevin will be reaching out to you for your feedback. We always want to know what you'd like to listen to, what you'd like to hear about. Please let us know, and Kevin will make sure that you've got a copy of the recording. And if you want, reach out to us. We're happy to send you a copy of the slides as well, too.